Today I'd like to talk to you about an extremely important part of bass playing. Now, this is not about what notes you're playing, but rather what notes you're not playing. And let me give you an example before we dive into it. So I'll give you I'll play the same thing twice, and I'll play it two different ways. So here's way number one. Okay, and then number two. Now, which way sounded better? One more time. So number one, number two. Hopefully you said number two. The reason for that is something called string muting. And what that means is muting or stopping a specific note when you go to play the next one. So the first example I gave you was playing string number one and string number two, and they both ring at the same time. The second example I gave you was stopping the first one when I go to play the second one. So let's take a close look at how to do this. And we're just going to focus right now on the three notes we've used at our intro lesson and the three notes we're going to use to play along with very shortly. So the three notes, just to recap, are open string 1, which is called G, open string 2, which is called D, and finally, 3rd fret on string 3 called C. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with G, and we're going to look at how to go from G to D and G to C with string muting. Now there's a bunch of ways you can do it, but right now we're going to separate it into either left-hand string muting or right-hand string muting. So going from G to D, the way you would stop it is when you go to play string number 2, with your left hand, you just lightly touch string number 1 and stop the note from ringing at the same time that you would play string number 2. Now the danger is when you stop that string, your first instinct is to really press down on the string. That's not what we want to do, because if you do that, as you heard, you get a note or a rattle or something like that. What we want to try to do is just very lightly touch it, probably with more than one finger, but if you just want to use one for right now, that would be fine. So just touch as lightly as you can, just get it to stop. So just on its own, just do that a couple times. String 1, play it, mute, play, mute. So you're going back and forth, right hand, left hand. Okay, great. So let's practice going from string 1, the G, to string 2, the D, with the string muting. Now right now, what's probably going to happen, and what I would like to happen, is mute string 1 and then play string number 2. So there's going to be a little bit of a gap, a little bit of a space, a silence in between the two notes. So let's try that. Play string number 1, or G, stop it lightly with your left hand, and then play string number 2. Now when we finish that note, we can do the same thing. We can stop it. So the idea is that over time, that gap between muting the string and playing the next one will get smaller and smaller till eventually they happen at the same time. Now this is a bit of a strange thing to get used to because your two hands are on different strings. So when I go to play string number 2, the D, my left hand is on string 1, while my right hand is on string 2. So it's a little bit awkward. It's not the most natural thing to do, but you'll get used to it over time. Okay, so that's going from string 1 to string 2. Now the next one is maybe a little bit easier. What we're going to try to do is when you go to play the note C on string number 3, what you're going to do is lay that finger kind of flat so that it mutes string number 1. So I'll give you an example. Without actually playing string number 3, I just want to play string number 1 and then just lay your finger across with the tip landing on the note C on string 3. So try that a couple times. We're just going to play open string 1 and then just mute it. Okay, now when we do that, we're going to try and actually press on that note C. Now, proper technique is to have your finger arched like this. I've talked about that before, but in this situation, it's important to mute with that hand, so we're going to have our finger flat. Again, all these techniques will happen at different times. There's not one specific way you'll always play. Things will be constantly changing. So let's try that nice and slow. So string number 1, which is G. Now we're going to play string number 3 on fret 3. So get your right hand set up. And when you go to press with your left hand, there we go. We stop string number 1. Now this one's easy to mute when you're done because as soon as you lift your finger, the note stops. So let's try that again. String number 1, G, play the C on string number 3, and muting while you do that. A couple times, just try it on your own. Sometimes you'll want to hear them both at the same time, but in this situation, we do not. Okay, so that's starting on G and going to the other 2 notes. Now, we're going to start on D, or the second string, and go to the other 2 notes. So, the first instance, when we go from D to G, is maybe the easiest string muting you'll do if you're used to doing these rest strokes. Remember, a rest stroke is when you play a string, your finger comes to rest on the string beneath it. So when you play string number 2, or the D, and you go to play string number 1, if you do a rest stroke, it automatically mutes it for you. And that is a huge benefit of a rest stroke. There's some downfalls too, but that's one of the main benefits of the rest stroke. So try that a couple times. It's no different than what you've done before. Play string number 2, doesn't matter which finger you use right now. I tend to favor my middle one, but whatever you guys prefer. So string number 2, play string number 1, automatically mute 2. Perfect. Okay, so that one's not bad at all. Now we're gonna go from D, or string number 2, to C, or string number 3, fret 3. Now this is the same process as what we did when we went from G to C. This time the only difference is our first note is gonna be the second string. So let's do it nice and slow. String number 2 open. Then when you go to play that C on string number 3, just very lightly touch that finger to string number 2. Try not to have it flat, so you don't want to press on both at once. You want to have a little bit of an arch in that knuckle there. So not totally flat, just a little bit of a bend or an arch. So one more time, string number 2, and then that note C on string 3. Okay, now just try to go back and forth a couple times. Speed is not the goal here. The goal is a clean sound. Okay, so we've gone from D to both G, and we've gone from D to C. We only have one more to go. And this one, again, is relatively easy. What you do is when you take your finger off the note C, it's gonna stop it for you. The only danger is when you take your finger off, if you take it off too fast and all the way, you'll hear the open string. So what I want to try to do just for a second, this should be the easiest thing you do ever, but it's actually pretty difficult in the beginning because you feel like you want to lift your finger. What I want to do is play that note C and then just relax your hand. Don't lift, don't do anything, just relax while you keep your finger on the string. So you can see my finger's on the string, but the string is no longer touching the fretboard or the fingerboard. So try that. So play the note C and then just relax your hand. Okay, now the same kind of idea. We're gonna try to combine that with playing string number 1. Now, before we were trying to have this finger go flat. Now what we're trying to do is keep it on the string, but have a nice arch here so that it's not actually hitting string number 1. So let's try that a couple times. Some parts of this are easy, other parts are a little bit trickier. So we're gonna play the C, and then play string number 1, open, G, back and forth, C, G. And you can see when I go back and forth, when I press down on the C, I'm actually muting string number 1, and then when I go to play string number 1, I get rid of that muting motion. Again, all these things take a little bit of time now, actually a fair amount of time now, but it's gonna make all the difference in the world later on. People won't notice if you're doing it properly, but people will notice if you're doing it incorrectly. And the louder you play, the more pronounced it's going to be. So the last one we have is going from C to D. Same idea. We're going to play the C and then keep your finger on the string and play the D. Now you can take your finger off the string. You'll get more and more used to it over time, how to do that, especially like in this situation, we have a built-in right hand muting as well. But for now, just stick with the process. Try to keep everything the same so that you don't have too many variations, too many variables happening at the same time. Okay, so C and D. Great, so those are individual muting techniques. We're gonna try and put them all together. So now we're gonna go G, D, G, C, G, okay? G, D, G, C, G. Nice and slow. Here's the G. Now when you go to the D, mute with your left hand. when we go back to the G, your right hand's going to mute it for you. When you go to the C, your middle finger is going to mute string number 1. And then when you go back to string number 1, the act of lifting your finger off the fretboard or the fingerboard will mute the C. All right, one more time. So we have G, left hand mute, right hand mute, left hand mute, and then left hand mute at the end. Okay, so now we're gonna go D, G, D, C, D. D, G, D, C, D. So nice and slow, so playing D. Now we're gonna mute with the right hand when you play G. Now when you play D again, you're gonna have to mute with the left hand. And then when you play C, you're gonna mute with the left hand, the fretting hand. And finally, when you go back to D, we're going to mute by lifting your finger. Okay, one more time. So D, right hand mute on G, left hand mute back to D, left hand mute to C, left hand mute to D. Again, a big difference between that and that. Okay, the last one we're going to do is C, G, C, D, C. C, G, C, D, C. So nice and slow. So we're going to play C. We're going to mute by lifting your finger when you play string number 1. Now we're going to mute string number 1 by pressing back down and touching it, the left hand. We're going to mute by lifting when you go to play string number 2. And finally, we're going to mute string number 2 by pressing on C and muting with the back of that finger. So C, left hand mute by lifting. When you go to G, back to C, left hand mute by touching string 1. Go to D, left hand mute by lifting. And then go back to C, left hand mute by touching lightly string number 2. Okay, so that's a lot of little intricate fine motor skills, and you'll find that in the beginning what you're trying to do is refine your fine motor skills. Everything is going to be big, and then it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller till eventually it looks really efficient and really minimal movement. And that really is the goal. It's not really that exciting if someone's watching you play and they can barely see your hand move, but that means you're playing efficiently. It's not flashy, but it's going to sound great. So take this slow. You don't have to worry about just practicing this over and over again. Make it a very small part of your practice routine. Even a minute a day on this stuff over the course of a month or 2 will really help you out. And when we go onto the play-alongs, try to incorporate some of this stuff. And what you'll find is if you practice it, when you go to play, eventually it'll just be second nature. It'll just be instinctive when you go to do it. So as always, take your time, have fun, and play every day. Thanks a lot.